What's happening, everybody? On today's show, Kalen DeBoer lands his first big fish in recruiting since joining Alabama. Jim Harbaugh jumps to the NFL. What effect does that have on the SEC? And Bama fans critical of Greg McElroy? We'll tell you why. Locked On SEC starts right now.
You are Locked On SEC, your daily podcast on the Southeastern Conference. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And what's up, everybody? Welcome into Locked On SEC. It's great to have you guys along. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. I'm Chris Gordy. Thanks for making Locked On SEC your first listen every day. Shout out to everydayers. Free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, covering your team every day. We got plenty to discuss. Let's do it. Let's go around the conference.
Boots out to the right. Takes the handoff. What a catch!
Around the conference.
And we start over at Alabama as Kalen DeBoer has landed his first big fish in the recruiting world in five-star wide receiver Ryan Williams. Now, Williams was previously an Alabama commit, but decommitted after Nick Saban's retirement and took a bunch of visits. Some people even, some of those services crystal balled him to Auburn in the wake of decommitting from Alabama. But the tide stayed on him, Kalen DeBoer and his new staff. And yesterday, Ryan Williams recommitting back to Alabama. He attends high school at Saraland in Alabama, listed at 6 foot tall, 165 pounds, rated 5 stars, the number 2 player in the state of Alabama, number 3 wide receiver, and the number 6 overall prospect in the class of 2025. Again, he had been a class of 2025 prospect until he reclassified in December. And though he reclassified for 2024, he did not sign during the early signing period. He was an unsigned verbal pledge at the time of Saban's retirement. Earlier this month, like I said, he went and visited LSU, Texas, Auburn, and Alabama. But a lot of people thought this would be an Auburn versus Bama battle. And again, like we said, some of the crystal ball predictions picked him to go to Auburn. Now, Auburn just signed a ton of big-time wide receivers in this recruiting class. So, Bama, they lost a couple guys, like, Isaiah Bond transferred to Texas. So kind of made more sense for him to end up sticking with the Tide. But Kalen DeBoer, his new OC, Ryan Grubb, his new wide receivers coach, Jamarcus Shepard, all putting in Williams to commit back to Alabama's class. So big win there for Kalen DeBoer, especially when, kind of the knock on him has been maybe not the best recruiter. That's a big feather in his cap, just a couple weeks on the job at his new place. All right, a few other notes here on Alabama. Kalen DeBoer was on the Pat McAfee show yesterday. Interesting that he made an appearance there when Nick Saban made regular appearances on the Pat McAfee show all throughout the year. But DeBoer talked about the fluidity on his roster and said that some of the current Tide players are going to be the heart and soul of this 2024 team. He said this will certainly be the most talent on a roster that he's ever had. He went on to say they are the heart and soul. They're the ones that are going to bring this whole thing to life. The guys that are with us right now, they have just sunk their teeth in at another level. They're hard at it with workouts, going extremely well. He also said the staff has calmed things down as they get ready for spring practice. He said the core of our team is right here, and they have a chip on their shoulder. They want to win a national championship. They had it right there in their grasp. And these guys are already turning the page, moving on, excited about what our new staff is building on what Coach Saban has done here for many years. He went on to say guys like Jalen Milroe, the receivers, these guys are fired up about getting their opportunities within this new offense that they're learning. Now, one other note on Bama. 4 Alabama players landed on the ESPN way too early All-America team for 2024. Transfer center Parker Brailsford coming over from Washington. He made the first team list along with Deontay Lawson. They were joined by Tyler Booker on the second team and punter James Burnip on the second team. But other SEC names to make the ESPN way too early All-American team for 2024. on the first team. Georgia quarterback Carson Beck, Mizzou wide receiver Luther Burden, Will Campbell from LSU, Tate Ratledge from Georgia. That's on the offense. Defense had Vols defensive end James Pierce, Harold Perkins from LSU, Malachi Starks from Georgia, and former Alabama, now Ohio State safety Caleb Downs making the list. One more addition to Kalen DeBoer's staff, getting some help from his assistants at Washington, adding Scott Huff, who changed his Twitter bio to University of Alabama offensive line coach officially. He worked on Chris Peterson's staff at Boise back in the day, and he's coached the Joe Moore award-winning offensive line at Washington this past year. So a lot of guys from Washington, but going to try to keep that continuity going there over at Alabama. All right, other notes going on around the conference. Over at Texas A&M, they set their date for their spring game. The maroon and white spring game going to be held on April 20th. Kickoff time will be announced at a later date, but a lot of attention going to be on this maroon and white game. You know that they bring back a lot of pieces. Connor Wegman, the quarterback, is back. Mike Elko, the head coach now, and a lot of transfer additions they added through the portal. So if you're looking at spring games or going through and going, which ones do I need to keep an eye on? That A&M one is going to be very interesting. A lot of former SEC guys now on that roster. Desmond Ricks from Alabama, Scooby Williams and Jaden Hill from Florida, DeRicky Wright from Vanderbilt. So definitely looking forward to that. But again, circle your calendars, April 20th, the maroon and white game for A&M. One other A&M note, former Aggie and Ole Miss wide receiver Chris Marshall is expected to transfer to Boise State. That from Matt Zenitz of 24/7 Sports. He was a former 5-star recruit just 2 years ago in the class of 2022. Spent this past year at Kilgore Junior College after he was dismissed by Lane Kiffin over at Ole Miss. Super talented kid. Just had some issues there that led him to his 4th different college stop in 2 years. All right, the big news that took the college football world by storm yesterday evening, reigning national champion coach Jim Harbaugh officially leaving Michigan for the NFL. He leaves the national champion Michigan Wolverines for the Los Angeles Chargers. The deal is for 5 years. And Harbaugh was considered among the most desirable candidates in this coaching cycle because of what he did both at the college and pro levels. Remember, he got the 49ers to the Super Bowl and lost to his brother and the Ravens. But what does this mean for the SEC? Well, Michigan, as of reports last night, focused their search on their OC/O-line coach, Sharon Moore, who, served as interim head coach when Harbaugh was suspended for a couple of games this year. There were rumors a few weeks back that maybe Brian Kelly could be near the top of their list with Michigan, but look, with Kelly having the month that he's had, rebuilding his defensive staff there at LSU, pulling Bo Davis away from Texas, getting Blake Baker from Missouri, putting together a top recruiting class already for 2025, it's pretty clear Brian Kelly's going to stay put in Baton Rouge for good. So, interesting domino here, though, is that Texas is the only team from the 4 playoff teams to return their head coach in Steve Sarkisian. Washington lost Kalen DeBoer to Alabama. Michigan just lost Harbaugh to the NFL. And, of course, Nick Saban retired at Alabama. But Jason Fitz posed an interesting question. With Saban and Harbaugh out, he said, who's the face of college football? Who's the most polarizing good guy or bad guy that absolutely everyone will want to either root for or against? And it just kind of got me thinking. I think you start with Kirby Smart at Georgia, but even after winning back-to-back championships, it still doesn't feel like Kirby is universally hated by other fan bases. Jimbo Fisher was, but he's gone. People love to hate him. You could certainly say Dabo is that guy now. I think a lot of, particularly SEC fans, they watch Clemson, kind of rooting for them to lose. But Dabo's become hated by a lot of people. Dion is probably still more beloved than hated. But if he starts winning at Colorado, I think people will turn on him. Sark at Texas has potential if he keeps winning there at Texas. Ryan Day, the same thing at Ohio State. Look, he struggled to beat Michigan these last few years, so I don't know if he's universally disliked. I think Lane Kiffin is certainly up on this list. Could Lane Kiffin move up this list if he keeps making Ole Miss relevant? And maybe Kalen DeBoer, simply just because he's at Alabama. Evil Empire, people dislike Bama, so maybe Kalen DeBoer. Lincoln Riley, if he gets USC back to relevance, he can certainly be on this list. And Dan Lanning, I think, just screams a guy you'd love to hate if he keeps winning at Oregon. So it is interesting, though. You're losing a lot of big faces of college football. Saban was that guy. Bama brings ratings because he's so dominant, but also a lot of people love to hate him, wanted to see Bama lose. So now Harbaugh, I don't know if Harbaugh was necessarily that guy, but certainly, look, the college football playoff rankings, TV ratings show that, people were tuning in for him. So Harbaugh out of college football, Nick Saban out of college football. It's a lot of big names here we've had the last decade leave the sport. One more thing to keep in mind on the Michigan front. Sark and Texas, they travel to Michigan in week 2 next season. Should be a really good non-conference game, but consider this. This Michigan team that Texas is going to go face on the road is going to be missing the following from their national championship team: their head coach, their starting quarterback, their starting running back, their leading receiver, their entire starting offensive line, their leading tackler, both edge rushers, a starting corner, starting nickel, 2 starting linebackers. And that's before they even lose any guys to the transfer portal in the coming weeks. It is still tough to win in the big house, but Texas might be worth putting a bet on in that game. All right, a few other notes here. Paul Feinbaum was on the Tim May show based out of Ohio. And this week, Feinbaum, well, let's say he's given maybe a little bit too much credit to the Big Ten. He made a joke about not being quoted on his comments. He was doing the show from the SEC Network building, but he said he's been impressed with the trajectory on the Big Ten. He said, don't quote me on this because I'm live from the SEC headquarters, SEC Network headquarters, but the Big Ten has become a really good league, and I'm impressed. The easiest thing for a good old-fashioned Southern boy like me is to make fun of the Big Ten. He said, look, I mean, Iowa's still a joke, let's be honest, but the fact that the goofy divisional thing is over with and we don't have to suffer through another Michigan, Ohio State, or Ohio State versus Iowa game is great. And I think the Big Ten right now, with its TV packages, moving to CBS, and 4 programs they're taking in are really kind of putting them in the same category as the SEC right now. Feinbaum went on to say there are, it's a super or power 2 with, the SEC and the Big Ten. He said they're the 2 conferences that matter. It's been that way for a while, except that the Big Ten, through expansion, has really caught up to the SEC. All right, a couple more notes here in this segment. Over at LSU, they are finishing off solidifying their coaching staff. Brian Kelly hired Tulane offensive coordinator Slade Nagel. He's going to coach the tight ends there at LSU. We know how important tight ends have been for Brian Kelly, particularly his time at Notre Dame. And he's got some good ones at LSU, including Mason Taylor. But Slade Nagel won't be his first time at LSU. 2009, he was administrative assistant working with the LSU special teams. So Slade Nagel joining the staff. Former LSU DC Matt House is reportedly heading back to the NFL. He will go be the Jacksonville Jaguars linebackers coach. So best of luck to Matt House after he got let go by LSU. And over at Auburn, they are set to hire an off-the-field staffer from LSU in Will Redmond. He was LSU's director of player personnel. He's heading to Auburn in the role of general manager, which is kind of a role that we've seen take shape here in a couple different programs in recent years. I've seen it at Tennessee. LSU's had it with different folks. And so Will Redmond going to Auburn to kind of help some things behind the scenes there. So best of luck to him joining Hugh Freeze's staff. All right, more tidbits to go around the conference in just a second. Thank you guys for making Locked On SEC your first listen every day. I'll remind you guys, this episode presented to you by our friends over at eBay Motors. Like passion, drive, and patience, it's what brings home the winning trophy. It's also what keeps your ride or die alive. And eBay Motors has got everything to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. What is it you need for your vehicle? Chances are they got it. From exhaust kits, LED headlights, roof racks, superchargers, whatever it is, eBay has got you, or eBay Motors, they've got you covered. Whether you're in a speed, power, or style, they got 122 million parts for your number one ride or die. You're always going to find exactly what you're looking for. And with the eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or your money back. Again, with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. All the parts you need at the prices you want. It's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. All right, rolling along here, Locked On SEC. Thank you guys for making us your first listen every day. Shout out to our everydayers. Come on back tomorrow on the show for a Friday edition of the show. It's fun watching on the SEC basketball going on. We'll talk about it in just a segment. Alabama just knocking off Auburn 79-75 at Coleman Coliseum. We'll get into a little bit of basketball talk here in a second, but I do want to get into a little bit on Greg McElroy. For those of you who missed this on social media or maybe on the radio airwaves yesterday, Greg McElroy making it clear Wednesday on his radio show on Jocks in Birmingham. Of course, does the show with Cole Kublik, McElroy, and Kublik in the morning. He talked about loving Alabama, and he even said that he's raising his kids to be Alabama fans, but he said he's getting tired of the narrative that he's too negative when it comes to his alma mater. He said, quote, "I'm a little tired of this narrative. I don't like my school. I just kind of want to address it. I'm really fed up with it. Like I really am. All these clowns, the Barstool Bamas, it's Cruz, he called him Crux, Oxenweiler, the Alphonse Taylors." Again, that's a guy, former player at Alabama, who's very vocal on social media. He said, Alphonse Taylor, who I don't even remember playing at Alabama. I just remember being described as the laziest dude on the roster. That's what I remember. That's trying to remain relevant, which is perfectly fine. I don't care. He uses Bama. I don't. But the issue goes back to Caden Proctor, the offensive lineman that is transferred from Alabama to Iowa. There was some talk of maybe, there's tampering involved with the Iowa coaches keeping in touch with Caden Proctor. McElroy said, do I think what happened with Iowa is tampering? Perhaps. By the letter of the law, sure. Did their relationship that they maintained throughout his time at Bama, is that considered tampering? Perhaps. I don't know. By the NCAA's bylaws, yeah, it might indicate that it is. But what you need to also understand is every school's doing that. So we need to be careful, regardless of what team you're rooting for. If you're Georgia, Florida, UAB, he said, tell me this. Is what Kirby Smart did after the SEC championship, going over and talking to Caleb Downs, congratulating him on a great year, is that tampering? I even brought up when Nick Saban goes up to Aaron Anderson at the end of after beating LSU, he goes, hey man, you be catching a lot more balls here. Yeah, it's a current head coach going to a player on another roster and kind of telling him, hey, you should be here playing for me. Again, letter of the law, is it tampering or is it just a coach who had a relationship with a player? I get it. It gets sticky. And, if it was just DMs of Iowa players or Iowa coaches DMing Caden Proctor and saying, hey man, keep your head up, we're rooting for you. That's fine, in my opinion. But if they reached out and said something like, hey, I want you to come play for us, well, yeah, that's absolutely tampering. But anyway, getting sidetracked here. McElroy went on to say, he said, don't dig up skeletons that might make everybody look bad. He said, all the people that are critical of me and talk noise to me, rip me on Twitter because it's cool to make fun of me. It's fine. I don't care. I get paid a lot of money to voice my opinions. I'm perfectly fine with that. I don't care. But I'll say this. All the same people that are critical of me were probably also critical of Caden Proctor on Twitter when he was giving up 5 sacks against South Florida. This just kind of got me thinking. Fans can't have it both ways. Either you have an alum that is on a national stage and going to call it like they see it and be objective, or you're going to have a guy who's just completely biased when it comes to their alma mater. And I think there's a lot of great talents out there that call it like they see it. I'll give you some examples. Cole Kublik is an Auburn guy, but he does an awesome job of being impartial and calling it like he sees it. Like, there's no doubt part of him still roots for Auburn. But if he's on the call for an Auburn, Ole Miss game, like, you're going to get an unbiased call of the game. He's not going to go, oh, come on, you can't call that penalty on Auburn. You know what I mean? Like, you got to be a professional first. And I think almost all these guys do. Takeo Spikes, big Auburn fan. But he's been critical when he needed to be. And really that goes for all the talent on the SEC network. Roman Harper, an Alabama guy. Tim Tebow, Florida guy. I remember, Marcus Spears does the NFL thing now, but when he was on SEC network, he's an LSU guy. But in the past, he's been critical when needed. I think fans do take it too far sometimes in that you're just supposed to be an unabashed homer. I think of Kirk Herbstreit, who's an Ohio State Buckeye through and through, but when he's on game day, you would never know it. He's calling it like he sees it. But years ago, he had to move out of Columbus because Ohio State fans were bashing him so much. he had to move to Tennessee because of it. He said the primary reason was the incessant criticism he received from the loud minority of Ohio State fans in Columbus. Gary Danielson, over the last decade of calling SEC games on CBS, he got crucified where just about every fan base thought he was being a homer of the other team. In my opinion, that means you're doing a good job. If one fan base thinks you're being a homer of that one and the other one thinks the opposite, well, must be doing a good job. I think a lot of people don't even realize Reese Davis went to Alabama. Tom Hart went to Missouri. I mean, if you're a good broadcaster and doing your job well, you won't recognize any sense of homerism because it's not there. You're there to do your job. And so look, Greg McElroy, he's a Bama grad. He hosts a daily radio show in Birmingham, Alabama. He gets where his listeners are, but in doing national game broadcasts all throughout the season, he owes it to the listeners to be fair and unbiased. And I think Greg does a great job of telling it like it is. You know, we've had him on the show a handful of times over the years. So I'd say, Greg, keep doing your thing. If you're a Bama fan and you think he's too negative when it comes to your school, grow up. You know, there's plenty of homerific broadcasters out there who fans of their teams openly root for their teams. But look, if you're going to be on the national stage, you gotta be unbiased. And I think Greg overall does a great job of that. All right, a couple other notes here before we move on. Georgia. Paul Feinbaum on that Tim May show was talking about Ryan Day and the hot streak of Ohio State, crushing it in the portal, bringing in Quinshon Judkins, Julian Sand, and Caleb Downs. And Feinbaum said, when you talk about Caleb Downs, he said he was pretty shocked that Georgia could not land him. He said, it's one thing to get these players, but Caleb Downs to get him to Ohio State over Georgia is significant. He said everybody assumed Downs was going there. There's people in Georgia who were genuinely shocked over losing Caleb Downs, not going from Alabama to Georgia, but going from Alabama to Ohio State. So kind of an interesting thing to keep an eye on there. We'll see what Caleb Downs does there at Ohio State. But, yeah, I mean, would have been a huge win for Kirby Smart and his staff over at Georgia. Speaking of Georgia, Super Bowl roster's not set yet, but the SEC with an interesting claim of a streak with two teams. No matter what happens this weekend in Conference Championship weekend, both LSU and Georgia are going to have a player in the Super Bowl for the 23rd straight season. That is a streak not seen since Nebraska. Their streak ended 4 years ago in 2020. They had a run of 26 years of a Nebraska player playing in the Super Bowl. So you can go look at the rosters, but obviously tons of dudes from both teams. Georgia with Mecole Hardman, Ben Cleveland, Roquan Smith. LSU's got Patrick Queen, Odell Beckham, Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I mean, the list goes on and on of the guys playing in championship weekend. But, yeah, pretty cool that both those teams going to have a long streak of either a Georgia or LSU player playing in every Super Bowl since 2001. Really cool stat there. All right. Thank you guys for making Locked On SEC your first listen every day. Coming up next, we'll recap a little bit of the hoops action. That's coming your way here in just a second. Keep it locked right here on Locked On SEC. All right, as we dive back into it on the basketball court, we had a couple of awesome games last night in the conference, including number 8 Auburn at Alabama in what some have deemed the Iron Bowl of basketball, and it was a big deal. I mean, Coleman Coliseum was rocking. Malachi Moore and Jalen Milroe were both in the house. Bring some of the football players over there to get the basketball team excited. But about a minute or so into the game, half the lights went off in Coleman Coliseum, so they had a delay early in the game. And this one was interesting. I mean, Bama dominated the end of the first half of this one. They jumped out to a 44-30 halftime lead over Bruce Pearl's group. But kudos to Auburn. They fought back. Here came Auburn. They even took a 59-57 lead with just under 9 minutes to play. But Bama held them off. And Alabama gets the home win 79-75, knocking off the 8th team in the country, and Auburn takes their third loss of the season, dropping to 16-3. Alabama 13-6. A couple of those losses in recent weeks from Bama dropped them out of the rankings, but a win like this, you got to think Nate Oates' crew going to jump back there into the top 25 real soon. But big win there for Auburn and or for Alabama, and what a awesome environment it was for college basketball. Look, football's king in the SEC, but we got some really, really good basketball settings and rivalries. And Georgia, they got the 2-point home win over LSU, 68-66 last night, as LSU took a three in the final seconds that kind of like went in and then rimmed out. So LSU almost had a walk-off win there in Athens. The SEC did come out with a fine yesterday for South Carolina after their Tuesday night upset win over Kentucky. South Carolina will have to pay a fine of $100,000 for first offense of rushing the court. I saw some people there in Columbia saying, don't care, we'll pay it. Totally worth it. So South Carolina, they pulled off that upset victory of Kentucky on Tuesday night. CBS Sports insider John Rothstein, I saw he was on their TV coverage saying that Lamont Paris's team could have a higher ceiling than we initially thought when it comes to South Carolina. It was their largest win over an AP top 10 team in program history with that win Tuesday night. But Rothstein saying that the Gamecocks on Tuesday night were without one of their best offensive players in Miles Stute. John Calipari also said South Carolina was the best defensive team they've seen in the SEC. Rothstein said when Lamont Paris took the South Carolina job, he told me he wasn't going to get players as good as Kentucky or as good as Tennessee, but he was going to have to learn how to manage the game. So if you look the way South Carolina executed, he's building a Wisconsin-style program in the SEC. Of course, he was a longtime assistant there. He said, don't turn the ball over, control the pace. It's like getting a root canal without the Novocaine. It could be painful to watch it sometimes, but South Carolina doing an impressive job there. So, look, we'll talk a little bit more on SEC hoops as the season rolls along. But, again, already having some good, awesome games so far. And congrats to Bama with the big win over Auburn last night. All right, that is going to do it for this edition of Locked On SEC. Thank you guys for making us your first listen every day. Shout out to our everydayers. Come on back tomorrow on the show for a Friday edition. And, hey, for your second listen, go check out Locked On has launched our first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. It's called Locked On Sports Today. Just search it. You'll see the live button. It's streaming live all day long with a lot of our great national shows covering all the different leagues and sports. So, again, check out Locked On Sports Today on YouTube. I'm Chris Gordy. This has been Locked On SEC. We will talk to you guys tomorrow.
You are Locked On SEC,